Hello, good morning from London. It's 10 a.m. here, and I've got Marc Stuart, the Scottish medium, with me. Hello, Marc. Good morning to you.
Good morning from Scotland.
Beautiful. And it looks like you are somewhere in the space. So,
Believe it or not, that's Saturn. You know, I believe in putting forward my spiritual self with special effects.
Yes, beautiful. That's amazing. So looking forward to hearing about becoming a medium. That's the subject of the talk. But just briefly, I'll mention for the fuller introduction that you are actually a medium of the Dunfermline Spiritualist Church in Scotland. And you are different in a way from many mediums we are talking to these days. And the main difference is you always bring a proof of the afterlife from reading.
I'm a spiritual medium.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely worth mentioning. And I will give you the stage to present. I'll come back later. So we can make sure that people know what's happening today, because there is so much more to come today. So let me just give you the stage. Thank you so much. And I'll be listening carefully to how to become a medium.
Okay. Hello. So as you can probably tell from the accent, I am Scottish. Now, that might seem an irrelevance, but to what I'm about to describe, it is actually quite important. Before I give you my personal history, let me give you a little bit of European history. I was in America working as a medium in March last year, and I bought a history book. I'm a fan of history. It's something that fascinates me. And it was basically a description, according to the title, five ancient cultures of the world. And it was covering the Egyptians, the Mayans, you know, the ones you would expect, North American Red Indians. And then at the very end, there was actually a 6th chapter, which took me completely by surprise. Well, it didn't surprise me because obviously being Scottish, I know the history, but to actually be in the book, and it included Scotland. Now, if you go to anywhere in Europe, anywhere in Britain for that matter, and if you say, oh, the Scottish people were listed in this book as one of the ancient cultures, they'd have laughed at you from here to kingdom come. But they're not aware of they are aware, but they don't think through the implications of a very simple historical anomaly. If you go back in European history, back about 2,000 years, Europe was a collection of tribes. And the dominant tribe across the whole of Europe were the Celts, they're pronounced C, but we just call them the Celts. Now, we don't know what the religion is of the Celts. There's no documented evidence of it, despite, if you do a search on the internet, you'll find all sorts of spiritual groups claiming to be Celtic. But we really have no idea about the details of the religious beliefs of that tribe, of those tribes. And I say tribes because there were different tribes all over Europe. Jump forward several hundred years, and Julius Caesar and the Roman Empire, and basically look at France, genocide. And it was the Celts that basically stood up to Rome, were massacred, and the survivors absorbed as slaves into the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire under Julius Caesar crossed over into the United Kingdom, or what we call Great Britain on the mainland. And England, what is now the country of England, was conquered by the Romans. They, for various reasons, geography mainly, they were not able to proceed north, weather, hills, the highlands, etc. So the Scottish people were not conquered by the Romans, and the Celts basically continued. Now, they eventually became the tribes of Scotland, what we now call the clan system, you know, the romantic people running around in kilts, their bagpipes, but they are effectively the modern version of those tribes. Christianity came across Europe, it came into Scotland, and whatever the beliefs of those tribes were, got absorbed into Christianity. Now, jump forward X centuries, and in the mid-19th century, you have spiritualism, which actually started in New York State. That's another side story, which I'll come to later in my personal journey. But basically, spiritualism it started in America, but at the time it was Pax Britannia, British Empire. For any movement, any religion, and spiritualism is a religion. I'll come to that in a moment. it had to survive in the United Kingdom. Now, it did. It flourished dramatically. And to this day, you will see dramatic differences between spiritualism in England and spiritualism in Scotland. And the reason for that is probably because of the Celtic past, because of the, let's just call it spiritual beliefs that were absorbed into Christianity. The people of Scotland were ready to accept, absorb, and move forward with spiritualism. So the consequence of that is that in my country, Scotland, we have a population of 5.4 million. Now, let me give you a comparison to New York State in America. They have a population of 19.4 million. And remember, this is where spiritualism, mediumship, to be specific, spiritual mediumship started. Scotland has more churches than we've ever actually been able to document and count. There's reasons for that, but I would estimate approximately there are 400 spiritual churches centres, whereas New York State has 12. So that's 12 for a population of just under 20 million, 400 for a population of a quarter of that. So it basically means that wherever you are in Scotland, regardless of what town or city you're in, you are always a short distance away from a spiritualist church. Now, let me clarify. By spiritualist church, I am not talking about a Christian church. Many spiritualist churches are Christian. But I am talking about a church service where you start with a prayer, a speech, and then a medium takes over what we call in the UK the platform and gives evidential messages for between 40 minutes and an hour. And that is the bulk of the service. If you want to train as a spiritual medium in Scotland, you pretty much do it in a church. How do you train as a medium? I'll come to on my own personal journey later. So spiritualism, what is spiritualism? Okay. Spiritualism historically, as I said, started in America. And we went through what was called physical mediumship. Now that's seances, it's plasma coming out of people's mouths, it's smoke coming from behind the curtain. And notice I deliberately said smoke coming from behind the curtain because it basically opened the door for con artists to come in and, oh, look at me, you know, I've got somebody knocking on the table and I've got your spirit of your uncle coming forward. There were real mediums, but the door was so open for fraud that it began to get a very bad name. And that's basically carried over into the problems that spiritual mediums still have today. Now, let me give, this was mentioned by Monica, but let me give you some characters from Scottish history that indicates where Scotland is today. The most famous medium in history, full stop, and I'll argue with anyone that says any other medium is more famous, is a man called Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, who is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? Well, he wrote many books on spiritualism, spiritualist history. He himself wasn't a medium, but his wife was. And during the Victorian age, he was probably the greatest spokesman in favour of spiritualism. And he is also an author, as I mentioned. And his most famous character is Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock Holmes, in case you're not, I mean, I'm sure you are, nobody can be alive today who doesn't know who Sherlock Holmes is. Sherlock Holmes is the greatest consulting detective, the greatest evidential detective that ever was. Well, historically, literally creation, of course. So just put two and two together. The man who believes in evidence is the man who created Sherlock Holmes. Just think about that for 2 seconds and think about the implications of that. What is spiritual mediumship? It's basically giving evidence of life after death. So let's talk about let's talk about mediumship and spiritualism for a few seconds. Spirits are people who have lived and who have died. Now, they're not angels. Angels are something completely different from a spirit. You don't become an angel when you die, you become a spirit. And you are a spiritual being. You're basically, your personality, your character, your memories are spirit inhabiting a physical body. And that physical body is what you touch, feel, and see. The spirit is your personality, your essence, your awareness. And we're talking spiritually as well as just holistically being able to see what's around you. Let's not get into quantum physics. Now, there are many other types of medium. And I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail, but the most abundant one is what's called a psychic medium. Many people get psychic and spiritual confused. There's a very simple difference. All spiritual mediums are psychic mediums, but very few psychic mediums are spiritual mediums. Now, that may sound slightly derogatory, and it's not meant to be, but many people have psychic abilities, and they also have spiritual abilities, but they don't use them. They don't learn how to use them, and it's a very difficult process to learn how to communicate spiritually and not psychically. We are all spiritually aware. How many times have you been in the right place at the right time? How many times have you had a gut instinct feeling? How many times have you thought about somebody and 5 minutes later they phoned you? That was spiritual communication without realizing what it was. Mediumship is not receiving from spirit. We all receive from spirit, full stop. Every single person on this planet, to some degree, they may not be aware of it, but they are communicating, or rather, spirit is communicating with them. We all communicate with spirit. Whether spirit wants to listen to us, that's another story. But to be a trained medium, you have to have 3 skills. And when I say medium from now on, I'm talking spiritually. You have to be able to receive from spirit and realize and recognize. You then have to be able to translate. Think of it like being able to speak English and French, and spirit speaking to you in French, and you have to translate it into English to give the message to the person that you're giving the message to. And that's what mediums do. They communicate with the spirit of the loved one, and they give that message to the person that has come for the message. The third thing that you have to know are the rules, because there are a lot of rules about mediumship, and I see them being broken all the time on Facebook, and I find that highly irritating. If you break the rules too much, you can be prosecuted legally. I'm talking about laws that mankind has created. And you can also be prosecuted by spirit. Now, spirit will be very simple. You've heard about positive and negative energy. Well, if you, as a medium, give the messages in the wrong way, if you give messages that you shouldn't give, and spirit will test you. When you're training to be a medium, the spirit, you get trained not just by somebody like myself, you get trained by spirit. Spirit will put obstacles in your way during your training. They will put tests in your way. And if you don't pass those tests, they'll hold you back. And if you become a working medium like myself, and if you forget the rules and don't follow the rules, they'll take your ability away. Quite often in churches, you see mediums working that they're working psychically. They're reading the people as opposed to giving spiritual evidence. They stick out like sore thumbs. But basically, spirit has pulled the rug out from under them. So coming back to what I was talking about, that's what you have to learn to become a medium. Now, go back to the very beginning when I was talking about physical mediumship. Basically, this was mainly driven by laws. For example, there were acts of parliament that were introduced in the United Kingdom that dealt with the hoax, the fraudsters, and drove them away. We no longer really have, there are still some people that do physical mediumship, but from about 1950 onwards, when the law changed, physical mediumship pretty much disappeared. And it was replaced by what we call mental mediumship. And that's what I do. And that's where spirit communicates with you in your head in various different ways. I'll come to that in a moment. But basically, you get it in your head, you translate it, and you give the message. Now, the message itself comes in 2 parts. The first part is what we call evidence. And this is what Monica was talking about. I watch mediums constantly because I run my own group. And I get a lot of people wanting to do broadcasts of messages in the group. And I very quickly get rid of them if they don't follow the first rule, and that's give evidence. Now, the evidence is personal. The evidence is basically proof that the person that you're giving the message to can accept as being the person that the medium says is coming forward to communicate. It has to be things that only you know. It can be personality. It can be memories. It can be something as simple as a color. It may very well be that it's your grandfather that's coming forward to give the message. And it may very well be that there was an instant in your past, I don't know, maybe you were at the fair, maybe his favorite color was yellow, maybe your favorite color was yellow, maybe you've got a memory that involves the color yellow. But you know that if your grandfather came forward and if he gives you the first line of evidence is, I've got the color yellow, that has immediate significance to yourself. That can be physical descriptions, height, physical build. It can be a description of personality. It can actually also be the spirit expressing themselves through the medium. The medium suddenly changes the way that they're speaking. With me, it's my hands. Quite often, I find my hands moving around and doing, for example, I was giving a message to somebody about a year ago, and she wanted to get her daughter coming forward who was in spirit. And basically, there had been a murder. Someone was dead, and the woman had passed into spirit, and she had been blamed for killing somebody, and it was with a gun. So all of a sudden, for no reason, my hand took the shape of a gun, and I'm going like this. I mean, I thought I was going like that with my finger, but in reality, my hand was going like that. And I suddenly, sort of after about 30 seconds, I said, I don't know why I'm doing this. Does this make any sense to you? And she said, yes, it makes perfect sense. The minute she said that, then the daughter came forward and gave me basically a lot of evidence and message that proved to this mother that the daughter had not committed the murder that they thought she had done before she died. So that's an extreme example of what I'm talking about. As I said, after the evidence, you then move into what I just talked about, the message. Now, the message can also be evidential. It's a grey area between the two. So, for example, another reading that I gave, well, this would be about 3 months ago. It was a woman in California. And I suddenly started, I had a great aunt. Now, our great aunt was like a distant relation that she only knew a little bit about. And there was no way she was expecting the great aunt to come forward. You know, it was oh, all right, okay. I mean, I was able to give her evidence that she could confirm with relations. But basically, the great aunt had basically been on a farm for horses. And then I basically said to her, who is it? I mean, I basically got sort of like a dual feeling. The aunt was giving horses as evidence, but she also wanted to talk about horses with what was our great niece. So I said to her, look, I don't know what the significance about this is, but do you have something to do with horses? To which her jaw went like that. She said, yes. And then she basically told me that she had accepted a job to go work on a farm for abandoned horses. And she hadn't told anybody about it, especially her daughter. Now, her daughter was a teenager, and she was effectively getting ready to sell her house to relocate. I mean, I don't know how far they were relocating, but they were going to have to relocate to live on this farm to look after these horses as part of the job. And she hadn't broken the news. I mean, her daughter, she was expecting her daughter to be madly excited, you know, living with horses and all the rest of it. But basically, the aunt was coming forward to say how happy she was that her great niece was working in the same industry. And then now I know nothing about horses. I know absolutely nothing. But I spent the rest of the message giving her advice about horses. Now, it wasn't me, of course. It was the great aunt giving the messages through myself. And basically, the woman could take it all. I mean, obviously, she obviously knew about horses because she was going to work with horses. But she was able to confirm that the advice I was giving her from her great aunt actually made sense. So again, that's an example of what a message should be. Now, let me talk about the spiritual world before I start getting more into my own personal journey. Let me give you two very simple numbers. The human population is currently about, 7.8 million? Let's just round it up. There's 8 million of us. Now, if I was to ask you a rhetorical question, how many spirits are there? Well, basically, the question is, how many humans have been born? How many people have lived and died and passed into the spiritual world? Well, science has estimated that at 108 billion. So since the first, and I'm not going to insult anybody's religion. I don't believe there was Adam and Eve in the Christian Bible. But for the sake of argument, let's just say since the first recognizable mother, father, human race gave birth to the rest of the humans, there have been 108 billion of us. And only 8 billion of us are still living. So that means that we are outnumbered, divide 100 by 8. That's how many spirits there are for how many humans. Now, the second thing I want to point out is that when you die, you are the same person. So if you're a nasty son of a excuse my language, when you waken up on the other side after dying, you are the same person. If you're Mother Teresa, if you're a saint, when you wake up on the other side, you are the same person. The journey continues after death. You don't stay the same person, but basically you die. It's the analogy that we always give, that death is like being born, only we're the baby going through the process of birth. Is Earth the mother? I don't know. Let's not go down that route. But basically, on the other side of the journey through the tunnel, you waken up on the other side, literally as the same person that you were when you died, surrounded by your loved ones who are waiting to meet you, obviously. But it's like being born again. And you have to learn in this new world, the spiritual world, how to exist, how to crawl like a baby, how to walk around like a toddler, how to walk, how to learn to add, how to grow up into a child, from child to teenager, from teenager to adult. And that journey, you can actually see through the messages. Like, I have certain spirits that I have had communication with, say, over 20 years. And the spirit that they are now is not the same spirit that they were 20 years ago. So I can talk about that from personal experience. Also, if you are a parent who has lost a child, and these are the hardest messages to give, because people come to spiritual mediums for very specific reasons. And quite often you get messages for mothers. I mean, I gave one during the week. Children generally are not allowed to come forward to give messages. It's a bit like playing with fire. You don't let a 6-year-old light a match. And on the other side, spirits, children continue to grow. So again, I gave another message this week to another mother who had lost her son as a child, and he was coming forward as an adult, and he was very angelic. As I say, angels and spirit get very confused. Basically, when you become an adult, you can have a relationship and you can have children. And there are people that are born on the spiritual realm who have never walked the earth. Those are what we call angels. And they are hugely different from people that have lived on the earth and have gone to the other side. And that's where in religion, there's a lot of confusion. You don't wake up on the other side with wings and fly around like an angel. And I'm not saying the angelic creatures do that either. They walk around just like us. And yes, they walk around and interact. And they also work. That's another misnomer. People think that on the other side, it's all, clouds, etc. There is an economy. Now, I'm not saying there's money. I have no conception how people work, how they get jobs allocated, how they learn. But we all have guides. We all have spiritual beings that work with us, that protect us, that teach us. And those are spirits that are actually working. So I'm sorry, but if you're lazy and you go over to the other side, you're going to have to learn to work. I don't know whether it's the journey is what you earn, or if you're paid and you buy the journey, or if the journey is learning. That's way beyond my level of comprehension of the spiritual realm. But at its very basic, if I sound confused, I am. I'm like a 5-year-old that gets pocket money, that's trying to explain monetary policy to an adult. And I'm trying to express it in terminology that as a 5-year-old I understand. Because even as a spiritual medium, we only get glimpses of the other side. So that's the spiritual world. Now let's talk about the earth religious world, and also where spiritualism fits in with that. Because again, this is quite relevant to understanding what I am as a spiritual medium. I'm going to throw 2 numbers at you. Are you aware that there are 4,200 recognized and documented religions in the world? Just think about that. 4,200 religions. Well, let me give you another number that's even more frightening. The top religion in the world is Christianity. Now, I am a Christian, so don't take my tone to be critical. The top religion, how many versions of Christianity do you think there are? Well, let me tell you. There are 33,000 versions of Christianity. Now, take an average number somewhere along that list and multiply it out. how many actual religious beliefs are there? And how many of them are correct? Well, let me answer that question by reading you a poem. This is a poem by Tennyson, and it's called The Blind Man and the Elephant. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get through the whole poem, but I'll give you the gist of it. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happened to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. God bless me, but the elephant is nothing but a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, Ho! What have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me it is mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant, it is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happened to take the squirming trunk within his hands. I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out his eager hand, and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like, is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough, the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who changed to touch the ear, said, E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swiping tail that fell within his scope. I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so those men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So oft in theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, tread on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about the elephant not one of them has seen. And that's by the poet John Godfrey Saxe. So basically, very poetically, he's expressing religion, but instead of 6, 4,200. Where do those religious beliefs come from? Well, as I've indicated at the beginning, the Celts were at least we believe the Celts are an ancient spiritual race. And most of the other ancient races, if you look at them, for example, the major one that still survives today are the American Red Indians, or the Native American Indians. If you go to America on any of the spiritual communities there, or if you come from America, you'll be aware of the level of awe that people have in the spiritual community for the spiritual beliefs of the Native American Indians. The ancient peoples were aware of spirit, and I'd think that all religions at the start are aware of spirit. Somewhere or other, at the beginning of every religion, there was, inverted commas please, a delusional prophet, a delusional medium, a delusional person who could speak to spirit, who got given a vision, who got given evidence, and then human interpretation, because they didn't have our modern mediumship training, and took over, and they created, or they wrote down, or they told whatever was appropriate for that civilization, their religious experience. And the really powerful ones, like Jesus and Muhammad, gave birth to the modern religions. There was a character in China, who went to India, and then from India, he stayed there for half his life, and then from India, he went back to China. Now, most people out of China have never heard of this character, but he's actually the character that the book Monkey is based on, and from the book Monkey, you have the television series. At least if you're not British, you don't know what I'm talking about, but if you're in Britain, you'll know what the Monkey TV series was about. It was fantasy, but it was based on a real character. Now, that character didn't start a religion, but he brought Buddhism out of India and Tibet into China. And Buddhism, although with the Communist Party, you probably don't realize it, is a very strong religious belief in China. And yes, I'm talking about China because my wife is Chinese, and I was in China in January of last year working as a medium. Again, we're getting sidetracked here, so put that aside. Getting back to what I was talking about, all religions, at some point, there was somebody who sat down and said, God has spoken to me, and here is my religious beliefs, and there created the religion. So there you have your 4,200 religions, or you have your 33,000 versions of Christianity and every other religion. They're all aspects of spiritual communication that have become a religion. Now jump forward to modern times. We have spiritual mediumship, but we also have what I'm going to call the wider spiritual community. And within that community, there are a lot of people that will tell you things, tell you practices that as a spiritual mediumship, I would not pay too much attention to. Because I believe very simply in spiritual communication that gives you evidence. Come back to the numbers that I was talking about. We as human beings, living human beings, are outnumbered 100 to 8. For every 8 humans, there are 100 spirits. And the spirits are around us everywhere. And those are just the human spirits, and those are not taking account of the angels that were born in the spiritual realm. The spiritual world is bigger than you can imagine. It's more complex than we can even envision. And they're all around us. Now, I can see I'm talking a lot longer than I planned to, but so I'm going to try and speed things up and get on to how I became a medium. But basically, catch-22. There are people that are getting communications that have not been through training, which I'm going to come on to in a second, and they create cults, they create belief systems. For example, a lot of people talk about evil spirits, and there are evil spirits, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying for 1 second that there are not. And they talk about ways that you should protect yourself. Well, the first way that you protect yourself is by closing. Now, this is the first thing that you learn in spiritual training, how to be open and how to be closed. And that is quite simply how to stop spirit communicating with you. You're walking along the high street. If you've ever been to China and if you've ever walked along the street there, it's radically different, because when you come to the traffic lights, there's a solid wall of maybe 200 people facing you, coming across the road, along with the 200 people on your side of the road crossing over at the same time. Compare that to a British high street, a British or an American, and you're lucky if there's maybe a dozen people around you on the entire street. So that's the human race compared to the spiritual race. There are things like lost spirits. Those are people that have died but don't realize they've died. And it's a form of insanity. And quite often you'll get people that communicate with lost spirits and don't realize that it's a spirit that needs help. It's a spirit that needs to speak to a spiritual medium that is able to guide that spirit, to teach that spirit that it's dead, and help it to communicate with the other spirits. It's basically put a brick wall in front of itself, himself, herself, and it's refusing to communicate with the spirits that are trying to help that spirit over to the other side to be reborn. Still trying to live on the earthly plane. Most ghost stories can probably be traced back to things like that. Most horror stories of possession can be traced back to things like that. Then you have synchronicity. Now, this is another form of mediumship, but it's where spirits actually physically affect the world around you. The term synchronicity actually comes from, I can't remember the terminology, but a mental doctor who actually documented it. He published a paper on the subject, and he basically took probability and tried to explain that people that seemed to be lucky were having help from the other side. Obviously, his career didn't go too much forward, but if you do a search on the internet, I can't remember the man's name, I think he was German, you can find the paper and you can read it, and he's also published a couple of books that are well worth reading on the subject. But this is where you get people talking about how you have to have positive energy and you get positive energy back. I'm all in favor of that, but what the positive energy coming back is actually spirits helping you. And we all have spirits helping us. Remember when I said if you don't follow the rules, you get the rug pulled out from under you as a medium? Well, that's true for human beings as well. If you do evil unto others, then you open the door for spirit to retaliate against you. And it's not some divine retribution, it's the spirit of the people that you hurt that will retaliate. And your spiritual guides will not be in a position to protect you. So, for example, when my father died, now I'm crossing over into how I became a medium, because it was actually serendipity that got me into spiritualism, not mediumship. My father died about 20 years ago. He and my mother had a business. My father had been terminally ill with cancer for 8 years, and myself and my sister had been living with my parents, helping look after my father, helping to run the business. And basically, the business was left in a financial mess. My father died. I continued to live with my mother to help her to sort out the mess. And then it was a small hotel, she put the hotel up for sale. Eventually, she got an offer for the hotel, but it wasn't enough money to clear all the debt to give her enough money to buy an apartment to live in. Now, I had my own apartment. Although I was living with my mother, I had been renting out my own apartment for multiple years to go back and live and support my parents. I wasn't doing it financially, but practically to help my parents. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but basically several things happened. The bank turned around and gave my mother £40,000. Now, remember, this is over 2 decades ago, so that's a lot of money in those days. They quite literally said, "You've been good customers, etc. We understand the situation you're in. We're writing off £40,000 of your debt." Now, that was a third of her debt. At the same time, the person that had bought the hotel didn't complete. That means they didn't come up with the money to buy the hotel. The apartment beneath my one came up for sale, and my mother tried to buy it. Now, combined with the price of the hotel plus the money that the bank had written off, she had exactly to the penny, talk about coincidence, to the penny, the amount of money to buy that apartment. Now, the people that were buying the hotel didn't come up with the money for about a year. Now, of course, the people that owned the flat were my neighbors. So I spent a year going, "Oh, please don't sell. My mother's going to buy. She's going to get the money. Please just..." Eventually, they turned around to me and my mother and said, "Look, we're sorry. This has gone on too long, but we've had another offer for the apartment. We're selling it to these people." So my mother's face went like that because she had really wanted this apartment to be near me, her son. You know, yeah, God, mum's moving in beneath me. Anyway, on the same day, literally the same day, 2 things happened. The people with the hotel completed, so she had the money, and the apartment above my apartment came up for sale at exactly the same price. And it was the quickest purchase you've ever seen. Now, okay, that's maybe a whole series of coincidences, but I always just had this sneaking feeling that it had been the spirit of my father. Like I said at the beginning, that people communicate, we all receive messages. I just received the message from my father that it was him that had sorted everything out for my mother. And that's called serendipity. Now, a lot of things happened over the next 8 years. A lot of very similar things happened to myself. I got jobs. Things happened at the right time to get me out of other messes. Doors were opened that should not have been opened to me, that ultimately led to me meeting my wife from China. Now, my wife had been in Britain for 5 years, and she was basically going home. We met on a dating site. This is about 13, 14 years ago. And literally, if we hadn't met on that day of that week, she would have been gone. And I was only on that date, on that site, again, for a whole series of coincidences. And I'm not going to go into that because, again, we're running out of time. But basically, it was serendipity. Just take my word for that. We fell in love the first day that we met. You know, you get told that you've got a soulmate. Well, she is my soulmate. We got married in a spiritualist church. She came to a spiritualist service with me and basically got converted to spiritualism. During those about 13 years, well, yeah, it'd be about 10, let's just say a decade, between my father passing and me getting married to my second wife. I had a very bad point in my life. Very, very bad point. And I don't know why, but I just went to my local spiritualist church and they opened the doors, they welcomed me in, and I got messages from my father that basically confirmed everything and a lot more that people couldn't know about. Only myself and my mother knew this about my father, that got confirmed, that convinced me 100%. And there I was. They gave me emotional support that got me through my bad bit of my life. And I started sitting in what's called a circle. Now, a circle is where you learn to become a medium. And about 5 years later, I was progressing to the point where I started working as a medium myself. My wife joined me in circle, and she's quite capable of giving messages as well, although she chooses not to do so. So what is a circle? A circle is where you sit in a metaphoric, online obviously you can't do it in a circle, but when you meet in reality, you sit in a protective circle. The spirits that you have working with you and protecting you work together to train the people in the circle and teach you how to become a medium. And the lessons are very simple. A lot of the things I've already covered in this talk, but basically you learn how to open, you learn how to close. That is probably the most important lesson. Everybody that is, if you go on internet and just do a search, you'll find group after group, person after person saying that they've had their spiritual awakening. Fine, I'm not making fun of anybody that's had a spiritual awakening, because I've indicated that we are all spiritually able to receive messages. But they talk about it as though I've had my big moment and spirit realm has opened up to me and they've started to communicate with me. And for many people, that's true. That does happen. They go through an emotional crisis. It happened to myself when I went through my bad spot. And obviously I was driven to go to the church for protection. And that's the important bit, for protection. Because if you're open to the massive communication. And trust me, not all of it is bad. Passing spirit, oh, you're open, and they just want to say hello. Usually when somebody sits in spirit, they get very excited and they go around open. That is, they switch the button on so they can receive messages. Now that's extremely dangerous, because what's happening to you is your body is using up energy. Now let me give you a very practical example of what I'm talking about. I am a type 1 diabetic, and I think this is why I was guided to a circle when I had my, in inverted commas, awakening. I sat in a circle. Now, my sugar level should be round about 5-6. And if it goes below, between 5 and 8, so say a perfect sugar level for me is 5, 6, 7. If it goes below 5, my sugar level is too low and I need to eat sugar. If it goes to about 3, then you start getting physical effects. It's like being drunk. For me, it's like being drunk. And if it goes to 1 or lower, then I go into a coma and ultimately I can die. So I finished the circle. I felt perfect. I got up, I got in the car, I drove home, went into the home. My wife said, you need to test your sugar level. She's actually psychically tuned into me. She can tell when my sugar level is low. She can be in China, I can be in Edinburgh, and I get a message or a phone call, test your sugar level. I test it and it's too low. So anyway, I tested my sugar level and it was so low it was off the scale. It was less than 1. Now I should have been lying on the floor, unconscious in a coma. I should not have been physically capable of having a coherent conversation and driving the car home. Spirit were protecting me and they were teaching me a very rapid lesson. Now when I work, I test my sugar level before I work and I test my sugar level after I've finished working. And I've always got sugar on the church platform or beside me in the circle or on my table, so that when my sugar level drops, I can test it. And now I've actually got electronically equipment now that monitor my sugar levels, so I don't need my wife to sort of phone me from China to warn me. But basically, coming back to where we were talking, that's a physical example in a diabetic. So if you're a diabetic, you have to be careful and you have to test your sugar level. But it affects non-diabetics in other ways. Quite often as a medium, I come across people and I'll say to them, you're having sleepless nights, aren't you? Oh, yes. I keep waking up at 4 o'clock every morning. Well, what that is, it's a spirit that's coming to speak to them at 4 o'clock. They're not aware of it. They're doing it when they're asleep. And you get people talking about, oh, I go to sleep and I get all these wonderful communications. Well, again, that's bad. Because what's happening is your body is using energy and you're waking up tired. Now, in the short term, put aside being a diabetic, it's not going to hurt you. But longer term, you find yourself getting drained and tired. And if you don't learn how to close, if you're on your spiritual journey that's unguided with no training, what's basically happening to you is you're communicating spiritually. And at the end of that journey, you're going to end up like a frazzled out old has-been. I mean, I'm being sarcastic there, but I have actually come across people that are at that mental state, that physical state. They look normal, but they're incapable of continuing because they're so exhausted. Now that's an extreme example of it. And that's somebody that's open constantly and in constant communication. but that is what can happen to people. And a lot of people that come from other descriptions, other forms of mediumship, let's call it Wicca, let's call it witchcraft, let's call it shamanism, they are all basically people that are spiritually aware, that have learned how to communicate in some degree with spirit, maybe not to the level that I as a spiritual medium do, but they haven't gone through the church training, the circle training to learn how to communicate properly. I get people coming into spirit, into circle, who are having messages. They do card readings. Now, cards are, for example, a training tool that you use to teach people how to communicate. You can't read cards, but spirit can guide your mind to see something in the cards. And yes, some spirits, some people will find the right card being drawn to have a message, or spirit will put the message into their head. I was at a fair in America, in Chicago, in March. Now, myself and one other medium out of 20 mediums at that fair, but the only two that weren't using cards. America, coming back to sort of like the history, they don't have the churches, as I said at the beginning. So they don't have the training system that we have in Scotland. So they don't have the education system. There are churches and there are a lot of good mediums in America. There are a lot of good practices. But even the good practices are years behind where we are in the UK. And I'm going to widen this up to England as well. So there I was at the fair, and there were about 18 people giving card readings. Now, there were a lot of people getting very good readings from those cards. I'm not being 100%, I'm not being totally dismissive. But myself and another medium who was working with me, who's actually been in Scotland but comes from America, were sitting there using the methodologies that I'm going to be using this afternoon at 4 o'clock for the readings I'm giving people. And we were blowing people's minds apart because they literally couldn't understand, where's your cards? How do you know? I'm just seeing it in my head. That's the way spirit communicates with us all. So wrapping up, a few years after I started sitting in the circle, I went to America. Now, you've noticed I've been talking about America a lot. It was actually to invest in some property. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was guided to go to the same area where spiritualism is based in America. Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Lilydale. If you know anywhere about America, you know that that is basically where spiritualism started, where it's very strong. And I bought some properties there and I started going back. And over the years, I have started working as a medium in America, as well as working in Scotland and the UK, and obviously now in China. And it's basically where I got into the idea of focusing my efforts to take Scottish mediumship and take it to America. And some of my best students are actually American mediums who learn what we do and take it to America. I mean, for example, I have one medium, the one I was talking about in Chicago. She works professionally as a medium. She has doubled her earnings per month since she started using the Scottish methodology. People just can't believe what she's now capable of doing. And she goes to a fair, she walks away from a fair with $4,000 in her pocket. Now, she has expenses. I mean, she's got a flight to get there. She goes to 2 fairs all over America a month. I'm not suggesting that everybody that comes into my circle should do that, but that's how she earns her living. She earns her living as a professional medium, and she earns a lot more money than I do. Let's put it that way. Anyway, that in sum total, that's who I am today. I call myself a Scottish medium. That's marketing because I'm trying to take Scottish mediumship to America specifically. There are other people in Scotland. There are more mediums in Scotland than I could even begin to list. I could list a dozen mediums just off the top of my head that are mind-blowingly good, that I would pale in comparison towards, but we all use the same methodology. Come to Scotland, speak to anyone in spiritualism, different variations, but going back to the very beginning where I talked about the churches that we had and how we began, the training is done via churches in circles, as I gave a brief description of. Now, obviously, I run circles online because it's not practical to teach people in Australia or people in America that I have sitting in one circle, as an example. And basically, it's a slow process. You have to first learn how spirit communicates with you. Now, you'll hear if you've come from an American circle, you'll hear terminology about the clairs, clairaudience, clairvoyance. Now, those are just bits of terminology, but you can't learn how to, for example, clairaudio is physically hearing spirit. Now, it's a combination of natural ability and the way that your spirit guides want to communicate with you. It's not something that you can waken up one morning and say, I want to become clairaudient. You either are or you aren't. And it's a self-discovery in the circle for the first few months to actually learn how spirit is communicating with you, and then learn how to recognize it. And for that, you need an experienced medium. And there are many mediums that run circles. I'm not saying come to my circles, but make sure that the circle that you go to knows what they're talking about. And if they start saying, this week we're going to study clear audio and teach you how to, then just walk away, because that's bad spiritual practice. Then you need to learn, after you know how the communications are coming across, how to interpret. And again, it's individual. So for example, last night I spent a session with a woman who was getting spiritual messages in a particular way. They were actually using physical messages for her in her head. They weren't physical. She was seeing physical representation of certain things. And she'd worked out that certain of them meant certain things. So she now knows that when she goes to give a reading, when she sees the sign, it's a grandparent. When she sees this sign, it's a parent. When she sees this sign, it's a child. And judging on the size of the objects that she was seeing, she can judge the age of the person. And 99.999 to infinity% of the time, she's correct. Now, she's the only person I've ever had in a circle, or in the person I've ever spoken to, who actually is being given symbols in the way that she was getting them, and they meant what she had. There were certain other symbols that she was getting that she hadn't worked out. And she was asking me, Mark, what do these symbols mean? To which I had to say, I don't know. But we were sort of like, we were basically throwing ideas around between the two of us to see, well, have you tried to do this? Have you tried to do that? And we were thrashing out ways that she could actually, from spirit and from the people she was giving the readings to in the circle, work out what these signs could mean. And I'm quite sure that having had that session, the next couple of readings, by the end of it, she'll know what these signs mean, and her accuracy and what the way she's giving messages will increase. And other people get emotions. So, for example, there's another woman that sat in my circle, and she couldn't get anything. All she could get was emotions. And again, in the circle, we worked out how to work out the emotions, how to interpret them. And very quickly, once she'd realized what these emotions, how to read the emotions, she was able to give very accurate readings to the people she was giving readings to. Everybody is different. And that's what makes the spiritual journey on Facebook so different. I often have arguments with people, and I just cover the basics. Oh, you get stories like, I've had this message, don't know what to do with it. And then you get 100 people all jumping in, telling her, oh, it means this, it means that. Those 100 people don't realize that they're giving their interpretation over that person. And what that person has to do is to go into a circle and work with somebody, a trainer or a guide, and work out what those signs mean for that person. And then I just go in, I'll say the obvious, look, you need to go sit in a circle. And before I know it, I'm a very forceful person, by the way, warn you in case you come speak to me. I've got 10 people that I'm having arguments with. Oh, you don't need to go into a circle. It's all this. I've got this way. I've got this. I've got that. I went to India and I did this, and I've followed this methodology, all of which is good for them to get them to wherever they are. And then I just basically blow them away, and I just ask a few direct questions. Okay, do you sit in a circle? No. Give me a reading. Crap. Do you want a reading from me? Right, fine. Argument over. That's an extreme way of dealing with somebody that's arguing with you, and I have done it before in the past, but put that aside. If you're spiritually aware, and if you think you've got the ability, and we all have the ability, let's put it this way, if you want to discover the ability, find a circle, join the circle, and it's a case of going every week long term. Think of yourself like a child that's just been given a new bicycle. To try and describe to somebody how to ride that bicycle, you couldn't do it. So the adult picks you up, puts you on the seat of the bike, puts your hands on the handle rails, puts your feet on the pedals. You've got stabilizers on the wheel, and off you go. And you very quickly learn how to cycle. The stabilizers come off, and you fall flat on the bike falls off. You learn how to cycle on the bike. You get kept on the pavement. You don't get allowed to go on the road. Couple of years later, you get a bigger bike, and now you're riding on the road. A couple of years later, you've become really good at it, really fast, and you go cycling at the Olympic races. Now, I mean, doesn't take you 15 years to learn how to become a medium. and I'm being deliberately derogatory, probably in the description of how to ride a bike, but that's what riding in a circle is like. Day one, you've got to learn balance, how to control the bike, how to interpret it. In other words, you've got to learn to receive, you've got to learn how to interpret, and you've got to learn the rules. And then you've got to learn all the other bits and pieces, like how to protect yourself, how to deal with lost souls, ad nauseum. Okay, that's my spiritual journey. That's how I got to where I am. If you've got any questions, please fire away. Okay. Oh, Monica, that was your cue to come back.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marc, for sharing your story, your insights, and an advice on how to become a medium. It's a process, like everything.
Correct.
And I'm so pleased to hear you emphasizing the importance of that spiritual protection.
Correct.
As it's so easy to get overexcited, opening up and getting that spiritual connection, which is beautiful. We all love it. I think that
you see it with everybody that comes into a circle. Like week 2, week 3. Oh God, I can open up. They start getting. They don't know what they're interpreting, but they start getting. The classic one for myself was I was sitting in my apartment. I had parked outside. And I knew it was illegal, but it was a Saturday, and I knew there was no traffic warden, so fine. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I got up out of the chair, I ran downstairs, I got into the car. The traffic warden had the ticket, and it was about to go onto the screen like that. I'd only been in the circle for 3 weeks, got in the car and drove away. So, of course, oh God, Spirit, I can do this, I can do that. And within 4 weeks, I was so exhausted because I've been going around open. I've been told, don't open, don't open. And of course, I was so receptive to it, I exhausted myself. And then my teacher, who ran the circle, sort of took her hand, slapped me across the face and said, Marc, you haven't been closing. Oh God, yes, you're right. So that taught me very quickly to pay attention to it.
Yes. Yeah. And there is nothing better than sharing advice from first-hand experience.
Correct.
And as we know, we will be tempted to make the same mistake because we want to learn from our own experiences. But at least you're warning people. So
correct. Don't play with fire.
Thank you. That's amazing. Yes, don't play with fire, however tempting it is.
Correct.
And it's great. We know where to turn if we want to have more advice. And you are doing a course, so that's if I understand it correctly.
Correct.
How long is the course?
We're basically going to charge. I think it was £49. Is it £49 or $49? I forget. I think it was $49 per month. So we're initially doing a 2-month course. So basically $98 for the 2 months. Now, what that involves is sitting in a circle every Sunday at 4 o'clock. So day one, it'll be a case of everybody introduce yourself, and we'll find out how experienced everybody is. So for the sake of argument, if you've been sitting in a circle before, I'll expect a lot more from you. If it's your first day that, you've got no experience, then fair enough. I'm not going to throw you in at the deep end. Then I'll sort of balance and judge, once we know the makeup of the people, etc. Day one, we will cover how to open, how to close, and you'll get your your daily exercise, which is basically meditation on a daily basis in a very specific format. In a typical, moving forward, in a typical circle, we do an opening prayer, and yes, spiritualism is a recognized religion. So just take that on board before you come into my circle. Then we do what's called a guided meditation. Now, a guided meditation is very different from your self-meditation because it's guided. It's basically listening to my voice, and I will effectively hypnotize you over a couple of minutes. I'll use imagery to relax you, to take you from being open to a spiritual state. You will then connect with one of your own loved ones, and that will last for about 2 to 3 minutes. And that's personal to you. I mean, I don't know who it would be, but I'm making this up. So let's just say your father's in spirit. And I'm not saying it's your father that will come forward, but for the sake of argument, you'll find yourself with your father or some other loved one. And it's eye-opening. The first time that people do this, they walk away with the jaw drops like that. Anyway, then after 2 minutes, I'll bring that to an end. Same, I'll guide you back and you'll be open again. Now, that is your first hands-on direct experience of spiritualism. When you yourself, guided, have a conversation with a spirit. Then, on a weekly basis, we'll go through various exercises to basically develop you. The people that, for the sake of argument, if there's somebody been in a circle before, with them, it's probably going to be a case of seeing what they're doing, what mistakes they're making. Because if they haven't been sitting in the circle for a regular basis, they'll have come into habits. Some of them may be good habits, and it'll be a case of reinforcing those habits. Some of them may be bad habits, and it'll be a case of, right, roll it back, stop doing this, stop doing that. If you're completely new, it'll be a case of, like, Monica, tell me what you're getting in your head. So, I've got this. And then it's a case of me trying to help you to self-analyze, to work out what that means. And then you'll, with your own guides and your own spirits, if you're getting it right, you'll get something else. If you're getting it wrong, they'll give you more information about what they gave you. And you'll be giving that as a message to somebody else in the circle. So for the sake of argument, let's say we've got 8 people in the circle. It's not just a case of you sitting, opening up to spirit. You'll say, like, Mark, can I work with you? Yes. And you'll effectively, excuse me, I'll sit up, getting too comfortable there. You will start giving me a message. And I'll be sitting there saying, right, Monica, go this way, go that way. And that's maybe the first 3, 4, 5 weeks. By the time you get into week 5 or 6, you should be able to do it yourself. And instead of me sort of, no, don't do this, do that, I'll give you feedback at the end. And at the end of every message, the person you're giving the message to will give you feedback. So they'll say, yeah, that was my grandfather. And yes, you got it all 100% correct. And I'll be basically saying, right, okay, but you should have asked this. You should have gone this way. Why did you not do it the way that we taught you 2 weeks ago? Oh, because, no, I'm not accepting that. Here's the way you should have done it. By the time we get to the end of 2 months, you are not going to be able to be a medium in terms of, here's my business card, I'm a medium. But you are going to be able to go to a medium and know if they're full of crap, or go to a medium and know if they know what they're doing. And you will certainly be able to give a message. You would certainly be able to sit down with somebody, open up, get a message and give it to them. You're not going to be 100% confident, and there's still going to be an awful lot that you're going to have to learn before you call yourself a professional medium, but you will be well on your journey. Now, with the training, I also do a couple of other things that you're not going to find elsewhere. You'll get access to a private group that I run on Facebook, and I make a video recording of every circle, and I do 3 circles a week, and every circle gets posted in that group, and everybody that's sitting in any of my circles are also in that group. So it's a place where you can go and ask questions. Mark, I might be around to answer it, but you can basically go in and communicate. It's data protection. We can't give everybody their emails, etc., in all the circles, but you can go into the circle and you can communicate. The Facebook group, and you can communicate with people, and you can also look at the previous circles. So quite often, I'll say to you, okay, we covered this in one of my circles 2 weeks ago. I'm going to cover it again, but go back and look at that video of that particular circle because, somebody else had a similar problem, and you can compare yourself to that person. And also, you don't need to sit there and scribble notes down, every 5 minutes. Oh, Mark said this, Mark said that, because you can go back and look at the video. Quite often I've got one woman in one of my circles, and if I don't have the video up like 2 days later, she's, Mark, where's the video? Because I want to go and look at it again. So you get that. And also, every Sunday at 8:30, I run a service. Now, I've been doing this since the church is closed down with lockdown. And, excuse me while I move my seat because I'm losing my head. Yeah, there we go. So basically, every week I run an 8:30 circle. If and only if I think you're good enough, like you're confident enough and you could stand up to it, I will invite you to work in that service. Now, I'll be there with you. But basically, what we say to people is, right, I've got one of my trainees from the circle who wants to get some experience giving messages. And I've got the people, I get maybe between 20 and 30 people coming live for each service every Sunday. There's maybe 10 to 15 people that are regulars, that come every week because, they get good messages and all the rest of it. And I'll say to people, right, okay, we've got somebody who's a beginner and I'm going to let him or her work for maybe 10 minutes, maybe give 2 or 3 messages, and it's real. It's throwing you in at the deep end and it's public. So, you have to be able to handle it. You might fall flat on your face, but that's part of the learning experience, because if you don't make a mistake, you'll never learn from it. Now, those are not, it's not a case of you're going live in 2 months' time, but if you're up to it and if you want to do it, you've got the option to do that during the 2 months. At the end of the 2 months, if you want to continue, you're more than welcome to do so. At that point, I run 2 other circles, and we, depending on how many people want to continue on the Sunday, we might continue on the Sunday, or you might want to join one of the other 2 circles I run.
Beautiful. And we will get to experience your readings later on this afternoon at 4 p.m.
Correct.
So that will be amazing introduction, practical introduction to what you can lead people to.
Correct. So you can actually see. And also, I'm doing what's called I mentioned the guided meditation. I'm doing a guided meditation at 12 o'clock that anybody's welcome to come to as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to put a link here at the bottom.
Yeah, correct.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Marc. That's absolutely amazing. And I think we all would need to agree. You did not save a detail. It's really, really detailed. It explains detail.
Apologies for being a little bit longer than anticipated. If you had a cup of tea you were planning.
That's fine. That's absolutely enjoyed. I enjoyed it. I'm sure the viewers will enjoy on replays as well. So thank you so much, Marc, and I'm looking forward to seeing you later at 4 p.m. today.
If you want the guided meditation.
Yes, when people are available, absolutely. So thank you, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.